Man pulls lion carcass from ditch and something shocking happens. Minutes later, the morning sun blazed mercilessly over the Tanzanian landscape as Ethan Parker returned to his farm after a week away. The property stretched endlessly toward the boundary of the Selous game reserve, where civilization met the untamed wilderness. His old excavator sat motionless on the edge of a dry field, covered in thick dust and yellow leaves that had accumulated during his absence. After starting the machine, the sound of the diesel engine echoed across the vast expanse of land that bordered the wilds of the reserve. The early morning sun shone down on the cracked ground, heat rising and making him sweat in streams as he began the arduous task of digging a long trench. This fence line was crucial for keeping his livestock safely separated from predator territory, each bucket of dirt dumped to the sides and piled up into high banks, leaving a deep, winding trench like a canal. The space around was quiet, except for the sound of the excavator and the dry wind whistling through the sunburned fields. But this seemingly peaceful morning was about to turn into an experience he would remember for the rest of his life, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about life, death, and the incredible will to survive that exists in Africa's most magnificent predators. While digging, Ethan suddenly felt the ground give way beneath the excavator's tracks. The earth collapsed with a thunderous rumble, revealing a hidden depression that had been concealed by a thin layer of soil and vegetation. As the dust settled, he immediately turned off the engine, his heart pounding as an eerie silence fell over the landscape. But the silence was broken by something that made his blood run cold. A faint, barely audible sound coming from the newly revealed pit ahead, where the ground had just collapsed. It was a hoarse, tired groan, like the sound of a big cat dying in despair, so weak it was almost lost in the morning breeze. Ethan stepped down from the excavator and approached the edge of the trench, his eyes straining to examine the cloud of dust floating in the air. Below, a thin, dusty figure was trembling and panting as if it had no strength left. Coming closer, he was stunned to realize that what lay before him appeared to be the lifeless body of an enormous male lion. The magnificent beast lay motionless at the bottom of the natural trap, his once powerful frame reduced to little more than skin stretched over prominent bones. His ribs were clearly visible under fur that had lost its golden luster, now streaked with dirt and matted with the evidence of days or perhaps weeks of desperate struggle. The lion's pale yellow coat, marked with the scars of countless battles, told the story of a king who had ruled vast territories but had been brought low by cruel circumstance. The animal's body was just skin and bones, covered in scratches and wounds that spoke of frantic attempts to escape from this earthen prison. What should have been a magnificent mane, the crown of Africa's apex predator, was now tangled and lifeless around a head that rested heavily on the hard ground. To all appearances, this was nothing more than a carcass, the tragic remains of one of nature's most powerful creatures, who had met his end in the most undignified way possible. Ethan felt his heart ache as he witnessed what appeared to be a life that had ended in the hands of cruel fate. He guessed that the lion had been trapped for many days, perhaps more than a week, without any food or water to sustain life. The depression was too deep and its walls too unstable for any creature to climb out, no matter how powerful. This magnificent predator had been slowly dying in a prison of earth and stone, with no possibility of escape and no hope of rescue. Kneeling down at the edge of the pit, Ethan's trembling hands reached out, not expecting any reaction from what he assumed was a corpse. The lion appeared completely lifeless, his massive frame utterly still in the harsh morning light. For several minutes, Ethan simply stared at the tragic scene, overwhelmed by the waste of such magnificent life and wondering how long the animal had suffered before succumbing to starvation and dehydration. But then, as he watched in stunned silence, something absolutely shocking happened. The lion's chest moved almost imperceptibly, rising and falling with the barest whisper of breath. Then, incredibly, one amber eye opened slightly, focusing on Ethan's face with the faintest glimmer of awareness. A small, weak groan escaped the lion's throat, and his half-closed eyes swayed as if the simple act of consciousness required more energy than his depleted body could spare. The realization hit Ethan like a physical blow. This magnificent creature was not dead. Against all odds, despite appearing for all the world like a lifeless carcass, the lion was still clinging to life with a tenacity that defied belief. What had seemed like a tragic discovery of death was actually a desperate cry for help from a creature who refused to surrender, even when everything suggested that hope was lost. Ethan knew he had to act immediately. He pulled out his old phone from his pocket and called the Selous Rangers with urgent, worried voice. His words came out in a rush as he described what he had found. What had initially appeared to be a dead lion, but was revealed to be barely alive, exhausted and severely injured, trapped in a collapsed depression on his property. On the other end of the line, the Rangers confirmed that they would set off immediately and be there within 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes felt like hours as Ethan watched over the lion, witnessing the shallow, labored breathing that was the only sign that life still flickered within that emaciated frame. Every few minutes, the lion's eyes would flutter open briefly, as if checking to see if rescue was coming, before closing again in exhaustion. The sound of a car engine in the distance made Ethan jump up, waving his hands in relief and tension. Two rangers, Hassan Winnie and Daniel Chikondi, stepped down with rescue bags and determined but worried expressions. They approached cautiously, their faces turning serious when they saw the lion lying there, appearing almost lifeless at the bottom of the pit. Hassan knelt down to check the lion's pulse, his brows furrowed in concentration. After several tense moments, he looked at Daniel and shook his head, not in defeat, but in amazement. "He's alive," Hassan whispered, "but barely. His pulse is so weak I can hardly detect it. This animal has been fighting death for days, maybe weeks." They concluded that the lion had probably been trapped for almost a week without being discovered, surviving on nothing but his incredible will to live. The depression had become a death trap, too deep for escape and hidden from view until Ethan's excavation had accidentally broken through the thin layer of earth that concealed it. Daniel examined the lion's condition more closely and said softly, "No need for anesthesia. He's too weak to fight back or run away, but we need to move fast. Every minute counts now." The comment was both a relief, since anesthesia might have pushed the lion's compromised system over the edge, and heartbreaking, since it confirmed just how close to death this magnificent creature had come. Ethan felt both relieved that sedation wasn't necessary and heartbroken that the lion was so exhausted he couldn't even lift his head. The two rangers quickly discussed a rescue plan, not wasting another precious second. Hassan instructed Ethan to build a temporary barrier around the area to prevent other animals from accidentally falling into the same trap, while they prepared for the delicate extraction process. They prepared strong ropes and thick cloths for wrapping, ensuring safety when moving the weak animal. The atmosphere became tense as every movement was performed with absolute caution. Ethan stood by, his heart pounding, praying that this fragile life would not be extinguished during the rescue attempt. Hassan held the lion's front legs, while Daniel supported the hindquarters, working together to lift the exhausted body. Ethan quickly helped tighten the ropes and maintain balance, his hands shaking but his eyes determined. Little by little, the heavy but limp body was lifted out of the deep ditch, freed from its temporary prison. Sweat rolled down the foreheads of all three men, their breathing rapid, but everyone persevered to the end. During the lift, something remarkable happened. The lion opened his eyes slightly, and for just a moment they blazed with something that looked almost like gratitude. Then he closed them again, exhaling a long breath as if finally allowing himself to believe that salvation might be possible. They placed the lion on a thick cloth, covering him with a thermal blanket to protect against the scorching heat and to help regulate his dangerously unstable body temperature. Carefully lifting him into the back of the pickup truck, everyone worked together before setting off for the veterinary station. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief, his eyes filled with fragile hope for the life that had just been pulled back from the very edge of death. The truck started, red dust flying up the dirt road leading to the veterinary station near the Selous headquarters. Ethan stood still and watched the vehicle disappear into the distance, praying in his heart that the lion would survive this dangerous transition from near death back to the land of the living. When the rescue truck arrived at the small veterinary station, Dr. Sarah Matthews and her medical team were ready and waiting at the emergency room door. The lion was brought in immediately, white light shining down on his emaciated body, making everyone present fall silent at the severity of his condition. The transformation from the magnificent predator he had once been to the skeletal figure before them was almost too painful to witness. Dr. Matthews examined him carefully, her face becoming increasingly serious as she assessed the signs of extreme exhaustion and severe dehydration. Her preliminary diagnosis was grim, but not hopeless. Severe dehydration, acute malnutrition, and the early stages of organ failure. We need IV fluids and nutritional supplements immediately, but we have to be extremely careful. His system is so compromised that moving too fast could kill him. The IV was attached with painstaking care, each drop of life-saving fluid flowing into the lion's depleted system like liquid hope. On the first day, he lay motionless, breathing weakly but more evenly as nutrients entered his body. The veterinary team took turns on duty, carefully recording every vital sign every hour, watching for any change that might indicate improvement or deterioration. Ethan called frequently to check on the lion's progress, his voice full of worry and desperate hope for good news. Hassan and Daniel also visited regularly, encouraging everyone involved that there was still a chance if the lion continued to show the will to live that had sustained him through his ordeal. On the second day, his breathing became more even, his body trembled less, and his eyes opened more frequently. The medical team began to express cautious optimism as his vital signs stabilized and showed slight improvement. Most importantly, he began to accept small amounts of water, a critical milestone that suggested his digestive system was beginning to function normally again. On the third day, Dr. Matthews delivered the news everyone had been hoping to hear. The lion was sitting up, drinking water regularly, and had eaten several pieces of soft, easily digestible meat. When Ethan visited, he was moved to see the lion's eyes shining with returning life, and even witnessed the faint movement of his tail, a sign that the spark of vitality was being rekindled. Hassan smiled, saying that the recovery process was progressing faster than anyone had initially predicted. It seemed that beneath the nearly lifeless exterior they had rescued from the pit, the heart of a true survivor had been beating all along, waiting for the chance to fight back against death itself. Each day that passed brought remarkable improvement. The lion walked unsteadily at first, but became more and more steady on legs that were slowly regaining their strength. Daniel brought fresh meat and clean water daily, marveling at the appetite that had returned with such surprising vigor. It was as if the lion was making up for all the meals he had missed during his imprisonment, eating with the focused intensity of a creature who understood how close he had come to losing everything. A week later, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The lion's body was full of vitality. His golden coat had begun to shine again, and the alert intelligence had returned to his amber eyes. Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The creature that had appeared to be nothing more than a carcass in a pit had revealed himself to be one of the most resilient animals any of them had ever encountered. Doctor. Matthews confirmed that the lion was ready to leave the intensive care unit and move into a semi-wild enclosure where he could begin the process of rebuilding his hunting skills and natural behaviors. As he walked slowly but determinedly into his new temporary home, his eyes shining in the warm morning sun, Ethan, Hassan, and Daniel watched with happiness and pride. The rangers explained that in a few months, when the lion had fully recovered his strength and proven his ability to hunt successfully, he would be ready to return to the wilds of the Selous Game Reserve. The plan was to release him in an area with adequate prey and water, where he could establish new territory and potentially form or take over a pride. As Ethan watched the lion explore his semi-wild enclosure, padding confidently across ground that was solid beneath his feet, he couldn't help but think about that shocking moment when what had appeared to be death had revealed itself to be life, hanging on by the thinnest possible thread. The memory of those amber eyes opening for the first time, focusing on his face with desperate hope, would stay with him forever. The lion's story became something of a legend in the local community. Visitors to the veterinary station would often ask to see the miracle lion who had survived against impossible odds. Children from nearby villages would listen with wide eyes as adults told the story of the great predator who had refused to die, who had waited patiently in his earthen prison until help arrived in the form of a farmer with an excavator and a heart big enough to care about the life of a creature that most people would have feared. Months later, when the day of release finally came, the lion was transported to a remote section of the reserve where he could begin his new life in complete freedom. As the transport cage was opened and he stepped out onto the savannah, he paused for a moment, as if savoring the sensation of unlimited space stretching out in all directions. Then, raising his magnificent head toward the endless African sky, he released a roar that echoed across the landscape with all the power and authority of his species. It was a sound of triumph, of survival, of a life that had looked death in the face and emerged victorious. In that moment, he was no longer the nearly lifeless creature that had been pulled from a pit, but once again the king of beasts, ready to reclaim his rightful place in the wild. Ethan promised himself that he would always remember the day when what had appeared to be a tragic discovery of death had transformed into the most beautiful affirmation of life he had ever witnessed. The shocking moment when those amber eyes had opened, revealing that life still flickered within what had seemed to be a lifeless carcass, had taught him that hope can survive in the most impossible circumstances, and that sometimes what appears to be the end is actually just the beginning of an incredible new chapter. The fence line project was eventually completed, but it had become something much more significant than a simple boundary between civilized land and wilderness. It was a reminder that the line between life and death can be as thin as a heartbeat, and that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we least expect them. In saving the lion's life, Ethan had discovered something profound about the resilience of the natural world and the responsibility that comes with being witness to such miracles. Years later, there were occasional reports of a large male lion with distinctive scars ruling territory in the depths of the Selous Game Reserve. Local guides would tell tourists about the legendary king who had died and come back to life, who had been buried in the earth and risen again, stronger than before. Whether these stories referred to Ethan's lion or had grown into something larger in the telling, no one could say for certain. But somewhere in the vast wilderness of Tanzania, a magnificent predator lived free because a man with an excavator had looked into what appeared to be a grave and discovered instead the most shocking and beautiful thing of all: a life that refused to surrender, a heart that continued to beat against impossible odds, and the eternal truth that hope can survive even in the darkest places.